Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. I'm really excited for the workshop today with Robin, Landa, and Aaris, Sherin. I will introduce each of them. Short introductions. As you both know, they're well known in the design education community, and I could probably speak about each of them forever. So Robin is a distinguished professor in the Michael Graves College at Kean University and facilitates the Design Incubation Fellowship book group and is the author of numerous books. 23 to be exact is the number I saw yesterday. They've been translated into Chinese, Russian, and Spanish. Her areas of expertise range from advertising strategy, branding, and what we're here to learn more about today is writing. So she writes in areas of nonfiction, fiction, and copywriting. So Aaris Sherin is professor of graphic design at St. John's University in Queens, New York, and is the director of fellowships at Design Incubation and is the author of numerous books, including her most recent publications, Introduction to Graphic Design and Sustainable Thinking, Ethical Approaches to Design and Design Management. In addition to writing about graphic design, she covers sustainability, design management, and the theory and practice of design. So we get to spend the next hour and a half learning from these two fine individuals. So thank you very much for being here today, and I'll let you both take over.
Great, thanks so much for the introduction. And I know Robin and I are thrilled to be here and to be collaborating with the DEC. This is hopefully the first of more than one event, the first of a series, and a continuation of a kind of great relationship that we formed between Design Incubation and DEC. We're all working to do the same stuff, so it's really amazing when we're able to collaborate and use all to kind of leverage both of our audiences and to share some of the work too, let's be honest. So Robin and I are going to be talking about becoming a design writer from our perspective, and then some things that we think all of you should know. And I do want to just set the stage and say we're going to start with each of us doing a short presentation, and then we're going to move on to Miro board for a little bit more of an interactive exercise and answering some of your questions. Robin, is there anything else that we should be talking about, or anything you want to say before I start sharing my screen?
Just hello, and thank you so much, AIGA DEC. We really appreciate this collaborative effort. Aaris, I guess when we get to the Miro board, you'll talk a little bit about how people can access that, and I think the links are in chat.
Exactly, yep. I think that our DEC chat gurus are going to be making sure that they're right there when you need them, so absolutely. Cool. So I'm going to go on and share, and just so you know, generally, if something comes up that you have a burning desire to know, or you want to ask a question, if you can put that in your chat. There are a lot of people on this call, which is amazing. It makes us feel very appreciated, and but it also means I can't see all of your faces. So if somebody goes to ask a question, I simply won't know. So without any further ado, I'm going to start. And so here we are. This is a topic that is very dear to Robin and I, who have been working in design writing for a long time. And I think one of the things that we found is that as other folks who come into design education are trying to kind of trod the same path that we did, we wanted to be able to share what we've gone through and sort of some of the tips and tricks, and sort of situate ourselves in a larger community, and hopefully share some of that information with all of you. So the first thing I thought would be interesting to talk about, and spoiler alert for anyone who's going to do the fellowship, I talk a little bit about some of this stuff in the fellowship workshop, but I want to talk about where I come from and how I kind of became a design writer. Because I have an MFA, I do come from a practice-based visual art design background. So my trajectory in terms of becoming a design writer is probably similar to what some of you are going through now. My interest in writing really started with and continues to be this interest in research and learning new stuff. And for me, that began at the Cary Graphic Arts Archive at RIT, where I was a graduate student. And I was actually able to be here behind these cages and go through all of this ephemera and original source material. And that got me really excited, and I wanted to be able to share out some of the things that I had learned and those ideas for people who couldn't come to Rochester, New York. And that led me into the beginnings of writing. And then as I transitioned from graduate school to getting my first academic job, I realized that having something to publish was really important for that. And I just wanted to kind of situate myself now. I had a job and now I'm at St. John's. I've been at St. John's for 15 years. And let's be honest, like my institution values publishing pretty much above all else. It's okay to write as long as you publish it. And it's good to teach too, but you know, they're coming back to publishing when they're doing any kind of evaluation. And so for those of us who work at institutions like that, I would just say that that kind of pushed me into writing as the primary method of sort of disseminating my ideas in a way that if I'd been at another institution, that might have looked a little different for me. So one of the things that Robin and I, who've been around in design education for quite a while, we spend a lot of time thinking about, and it relates both to what we read in terms of submissions to events or abstracts, editing we do, as well as our own work, is this idea that precedence in reading, if there's anything you take away from today, it's really this importance around understanding that precedence is important for all good design writing. It's kind of like the secret sauce of good design writing, I like to think of it. So to be good design writers, we need to be good, and it should probably say design in brackets here. We need to be good design readers. So that means it's great to read the Times or it's great to read the novel on the beach, but to be good designer writers, we really need to read design writing. And so there's really no shortcut around this. So I'm just gonna talk a little bit about what that might look like here. So on the left, this beautiful Black publication that you see with a rainbow is the newest issue of AIGA on Design, which is actually being published now. The newest issue is just out in a hard copy. And so for me, that's what I've been reading these last, I guess, week and a half since I got it. After our event, I suggest everybody goes out and buys this publication because I think it's really great. It reflects some of the writing and thinking that's happening in our discipline right now. We're also super excited that Dialectic is being brought back. So I'm looking forward to reading the next issue of Dialectic. But if you're thinking about writing a journal article, for example, then you need to be reading the other articles written in that journal in order to know the scope of what the journal is accepting, as well as the tone and what is successful at being placed in a journal. So I have an example of design and culture here, but it's the same thing if you're writing for design issues or another journal, whatever it may be. And then behind, I have a chapbook that I wrote on Elaine Lustig-Cohen for RIT Press. And it's a different format. They're these short little books. And when I was approached to do this project, I really wasn't very familiar with chapbooks. And so I went through and I actually read at that time all of the chapbooks that RIT had published to that point. And that helped me understand how I should go about thinking about the project that I was working on. So I would just kind of back up and say, you know, we rarely come up with truly new ideas. Instead, we build on the work of others. And your work as a design writer will be so much better if your writing makes that obvious, that you know who else has done similar work in the past. And it doesn't really matter whether you're writing an abstract or for a conference presentation or an article or a book, regardless of whether you are doing inline referencing or you have to have that list of references at the end. That's really how we are able to show that the research has been done. And I'm sort of harping on this because we're excellent as educators at forcing our students, or suggesting strongly to our students, however we want to put it, that research is an integral part of the visual design process. But sometimes I think we try and do a little runaround when we're doing our own writing on design, especially when it relates to a project that we've been working on, maybe as a design project or as a teaching project. So this means doing a literature, media, or teaching review as part of your process for every substantive project you work on. And so while that's not kind of elegant with those slashes in the middle, I think it's really important because in other disciplines, you might hear about doing a literature review. But we're a visual discipline. So in our discipline, depending on what you're working on, if you're writing about a series of design works or a series of collaborative projects, there might not be other people who've written on that work in the exact same way. So the literature review might not be as useful as the media review you do to look at that scope of what other people are doing, to look at that landscape the same way you would have your students do. And the same is true of teaching, even more so in some ways. If we can nod to other people who have similar ideas or working on similar projects in teaching, it's really going to mean that it provides opportunities to make your work better. It gives you an opportunity to give a nod to other people who are doing similar work. And it will, in turn, allow others to build on their work by referencing you, and it elevates the discipline. So that's my big plug for precedence and for reading. But you'll see in this talk that I think Robin and I approach writing in a very practical way. That while I'm interested in sort of philosophical ideas about creativity and how to write, when I'm doing workshops, it's pretty much just about how we get through this process, especially with newer design writers. So some of the structures that I use and that I work with newer design writers when they're in workshops or when they're working with me in other settings are here. And one of the most important ones is understanding how long it takes me to get to 500 words. And I do this by testing myself in a variety of conditions. So I'm just imagining in the summer, I'm relaxed, my brain is like turned off from school, and it might take me shorter time to get to 500 words. But during the semester, even on my writing days, even if I'm not checking email, there's just a lot going on up there. And so it might take me a little bit longer. So I try to figure out how long it takes me to get to that number of words in a variety of settings. The other thing that I do, and I think most people who are longtime design writers or writers in general do, is they separate research, making notes, writing a narrative, and then revising into really separate parts of a process. And one of the things that when I'm working with new design writers, but there are new or designers who are trying to move into writing, that they often do that can be problematic is actually trying to kind of mush all of that together. And I find that in most cases, I'm not saying that there aren't some of you out there who are just, your minds can do it all, but for me, my mind can't do all of that at once. And so I need to research first, and then that might be working with that original source material in an archive. It might be reading secondary source material, whatever it might be. And then I make notes, and I use legal pads still and actually make notes with this thing called a pen. So that's me. If I were to start writing now, I'm not sure I'd be using that pen, but I did want to explain why I do it. And that is that I'm reading and then I make notes. And then I have these stacks of legal pads that go away until I'm ready for them, until I'm ready for the next part. And then I come back to them and I synthesize my narrative from those handwritten notes, partially to avoid plagiarism, because it's pretty hard to plagiarize directly from my notes because it's all snippets. And so that's just the process that's really worked for me. The process that works for you might be slightly different, but one of the things I recommend is to try and find out the process of different writers and try them all out on either in different parts of the same project or on different projects. So finally, I write the narrative and then I revise. And I would just say that it's hardest for me to have that blank page and getting to having a narrative. So I don't worry about whether huge chunks of that first draft are going to be used in the publication or not. I'm simply trying to get something on paper, or in this case, into my Word doc. And then I'm actually pretty good and fast at revising, and that's kind of a separate thing for me. So I'm really looking at that 500 words to get to that first narrative stage for me. And then I start by having a targeted number of words per day that I write. And that's because if I do duration, I cheat. So if you tell me to write for, say, 2 hours, 3 hours, I'm invariably going to have spent some of the time doing something else, even if it's just daydreaming or doodling or whatever. So publishers use word count in terms of how they commission. So the book will be commissioned for 40,000, 60,000, 80,000 words. I use word counts for myself, and I have to get personally to about 1,000 words a day before I can stop. If I'm having a great day, it's more like 2,200, but 1,000 to 1,500 is pretty normal if I've already done the research. And I don't cheat, at least on my own rules, not on this, because I've just found it allows me to write more quickly. And then this all relates to this idea of scoping projects, because I think we want to do these projects like write an article or write a book, but we have no idea in the beginning how long it'll take us to do that. And all of these steps that I've gone through will help you in scoping projects. So the big thing that I do in the workshops that I conduct is I make everybody find their kind of like ideal publication, count how many words are on the page, times it by how many pages, and then figure out how many words total are in a project similar to what they want to do. Now, if it's a journal article, it might be a range of word count that you can do for the journal article, but a journal like Dialectic will accept a lower word count than a journal such as Design and Culture. And so it's still really important to say, like, here's a couple of these articles that I think, did something similar that I think went really well in terms of me being a reader. Can I figure out their word count so I have just some idea of what I'm trying to target? And then I do the math part, and I'm not a big math person, but I do find this to be really useful. I divide the overall word count by how many words I write a day, and then I start to figure out a timeline for a project. So when I talk to people specifically who are writing books for the first time, they often vastly underestimate the amount of time it'll take them to write a book. And this is one of the ways that we can start to estimate what that time will look like. So the next thing is that you have to have time in your week to write. And especially as we're sort of locked in our pandemic rooms here, wherever they may be, however nice they may be, it's hard, like things bleed in and out, right? What was work and what was home is all kind of mashed together now. So I always say schedule writing in your week, put it on your calendar just like anything else, and be realistic. If you just took on an admin job, like you have to figure out, like, is it going to be 3 hours a week you can write? Can you devote a whole day to writing? And then don't let other things distract, no answering email, the phone, etc. And you might say, do I really do this? I'm worse at this in the summer when I have more time, but right now I do have a part-time admin job and teaching and writing. And so my Thursdays are just that. And so if you do email me tomorrow, I'd happy to get an email from all of you, but I probably will wait till Friday morning before I teach my class to answer you. And then your deans may not agree with me on this, but there's no real true design emergencies in most of our lives. They're kind of manufactured emergencies because of the world we live in. And so I do try to separate out all of these other things from my writing, because realistically, if it takes me an extra day to get back to somebody on something, it's not usually truly an emergency. So I know some people do out of office. I don't personally do out of office, but I do keep a pretty strict barriers around my writing time. And so as I talked in the beginning about reading and writing, I just want to acknowledge that they take up very different places, at least in my life. Even when I'm reading source material for a new project research, it's kind of an enjoyable process for me, and I'm reading and I'm thinking about ideas. And so you might find me in a place that is more conducive to that, like the tub. Whereas when I'm actually writing, I take that pretty seriously, need to be very focused, and I'm usually just, at my desk typing away. So my last slide here before I turn it over to Robin Landa, who has written so many more books than me that I think you'll kind of get a different sense of writing, and she has some great insight into writing that's having over that kind of duration of time. But before I get there, my tips and tricks are like set aside time, use some structures. They don't have to be my structures, but maybe try one of my structures and try one of Robin's structures or something else you read and see what works for you. And then this is almost the topic for a whole other event, but prepare for feedback. If you're a design writer, that feedback is coming just like if you're a designer, and there's a whole other thing to kind of think about. And lastly, have fun. Like design writing should be fun. It should be something that you enjoy at the end of the day. So up next is my colleague, my friend, Robin Landa, who I hugely admire as somebody who just keeps writing, and we talk about writing a lot, and I always learn a lot from her, particularly because I think writing takes up kind of a different place for Robin. And I think that's great for all of you to think about, is how writing lives in each of our worlds can be slightly different. So, Robin, looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Oh, I think you're still muted.
Sorry, thank you so much, Aaris. It's a mutual fan club. I'm honored to work with you, and I learned so much from you as well. So a lot of my writing has come from my love of teaching, and my writing is an extension of my teaching. My first book was a textbook for Prentice Hall, and a sales rep came to my office and she was trying to sell me a book from Prentice Hall, and she said, "By the way, do you want to write?" And I said, "Sure, I want to write." And she had me fill out an index card. That's how long ago this was. And that's how I started my journey into writing about design. People ask why I write, or why anybody writes a book when it's so labor intensive and there's so much work to do. What a book can do for you really is establish you as an expert in the field. It gives you some authority, you gain credibility, of course you gain recognition, and you have a chance to impact the field. As Aaris said, when people are university committees review dossiers, they know what a book is, they know what an article is. They might not understand what a brand identity is and how that impacts the world. That's not in their scope, but they really know what kind of animal a book is. Also, one more point about this is I was able to get the biggest client I ever had in branding because he saw my book on branding. Next slide, please, Aaris. What publishers are looking for is an interesting kind of mix. They're going to ask you what makes you an expert in this field. What is your expertise? They're going to want to know what the scope of the book is. How much are you going to cover? So for example, I wanted to write about typography, and I wanted to make sure that it was very inclusive and it featured diverse designers. And I had pitched that to a couple of publishers, and in both proposals, I said that I wanted to go back and include a lot about typography basics. And one editor came back and said, but that's beyond the scope of what you're really pitching. So you have to be clear about what's possible. You have to know who your market is, who are you aiming at. So if it's an academic audience, is it undergraduates? Is it graduate students? Are you aiming at professionals? So you have all different kinds of audiences. It's purely academic, professional designers, or a general market. They're going to ask you about your platform. And what that means is, how many people can you reach? Are you on social media? Do you have a lot of followings? Do you give a lot of talks during the course of the year? Do you belong to associations that would help you market your book? All of that's very important to publishers because they do less and less marketing and they put more and more of it on the author themselves. Okay. To select a publisher, it's really important to look for somebody who publishes titles in your discipline. They all have their lists, they all have their subjects. They may move out of their sphere. One of my publishers didn't have any design titles before they took on mine, and you could think of that as a plus, or you could think of that as a minus, because they really didn't, their sales force didn't know who to talk to. So as it turned out, it wasn't a very good idea to go with them because the sales force didn't know how to contact design faculty and didn't even know how to, once they found the design faculty, didn't really know how to address them properly and talk about the coursework. So look for publishers who publish titles in your discipline. Even if they have a typography title, for example, they may want another typography title. Don't let that dissuade you. Visit the publishers' websites to see what their particular submissions guidelines are. Some of them vary. Most will look at a faculty member for a nonfiction title without an agent. You don't need an agent. If you want to aim at the professional audience, especially a general, if you wanted to cross over into the general audience and you want a big publisher like Simon & Schuster or Random House, you will need an agent. CAA provides a book fair or book area where there are senior acquisitions editors or their associates there, and you can set up appointments to talk with the editors and have one-on-one sessions, or you can just walk over. I always tell people to have a pitch ready for that if you are interested in writing a book, and even to have your proposal with you, or at least a table of contents or something that you can leave behind, and make sure to get their card or a contact information. When you do go to the publisher's website, and next slide, Aaris, please. You might need to find an editor's name. Usually it's a very general email that you can send to, like info@simonandschuster.com. I don't like to do that. I like to find the name of an editor, and you can sometimes find it on their website, or you can find it on LinkedIn. You can ask around. I prefer to go right to the editor through their email. Some people are very nice about it. Some people are not. Some people, one time I went right to an editor at Peach Pit on LinkedIn, and that worked out great. When you're writing a query, an email query, in the subject line, it's important to write query. And usually you want to also include the discipline. So a typography book, a branding book, visual identity book, whatever it is, and it just makes it easier for the editor. Or sometimes the editor has an intern working there or an editorial assistant, so they know where to send it and how to organize it. In your email, and it's very important, this is something you really want to work on, you're going to pitch your book. And probably some people will tell you to do it differently. One way to do it is to have your first sentence be the pitch. This book does, almost like you would pitch a Hollywood film. And you want to keep it short and succinct and make it very clear. Then you want to include your expertise. I can write a book on typography because blah, 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 right? And then, of course, you want to include your title from your university and your affiliation, because if it's nonfiction and it's academic, they definitely want to know who you are and where you teach. And you could even include a bio after that. I would not include an attachment in my first email to anyone, because that might send it into spam. You don't know. Don't expect a quick reply. Sometimes you get one, most times you don't. They're very slow. If you don't hear back in a couple of weeks, you can send that out again. Okay, thanks, Aaris. So here are some tips from me. When you're thinking about writing a book, and once you've really started to think about the subject matter, think about what you wish people knew about this subject. What's out there? How can you fill a void in the discipline? Once you think about that, what's your North Star? What's the hypothesis you're going to set out to prove? What's your theme? What's your premise? And you want to write that North Star down and keep it as your guide. When writing, unless the journal or publisher tells you otherwise, I would recommend using an active voice. Passive voice, we don't know who's doing the action, and it's kind of a little more, I think it's a little boring, but I'm a fan of the active voice. And narrow your focus. You can't aim at everybody about everything, right? And if you are a practitioner of design, you know that targeting an audience is really important. I'm always a fan of, when I can't think of how to say something, just to say it outright, and then I can edit it later. Okay, Aaris. Aaris was talking about making time for writing. I always think about writing as something that's non-negotiable. There are things in my life that are absolutely, I can't negotiate with myself over them. I work out every day. I brush my teeth 20 million times a day. I mean, we all have the things that we absolutely do. I don't even argue with myself. It's a non-negotiable activity. I have to write if I have to get something done. Sometimes I write for longer periods than others, but it's not something that I'll say, well, you know, I'll do it tomorrow. Not the way you get it done. One trick of a friend of mine who's a professor of English, and what he does is he starts a paragraph, one sentence of a paragraph, right before he ends his writing period, so that the next morning he has a beginning. He has somewhere to pick up and begin again. I thought that's a really good tip. Keeping marginal notes, separate notes, you know, and it depends on you and how neat you are and how organized you are. You know, I tend to write notes actually in my Word document, because if when I write them on slips of paper, then I don't know where they are. I'm just not that organized. But you need to keep your own, you have to figure out your own method of note keeping. And a fleshed out table of contents is absolutely key. The first book I ever wrote, I put the table of contents on the wall, and I kept filling it out and filling it out and filling it out, and just making it deeper and richer and richer. And that's how I've learned to work. And then what feels really good is when you check off what you've already accomplished, and that just feels great. And I do have to say that I know all of you draw and all of you design, and you know that the endorphins are fired in your brains when you do that. Same thing happens when you're writing. So if you're writing for a period of time, you're going to feel good. Okay. Aaris, thanks. Now here's the tip of tips. And you're going to have to put this in your proposal anyway. What are the 5 takeaways from the entire book? And what the language that we use for this in academia, probably all of us have the same one, is the SLOs. What are the student learning outcomes? So what's the RLO? What's the reader learning outcome from the entire book? And the publisher is going to want to see that in your proposal. I think it's really good to write it for yourself in each chapter so that it guides you. It's like kind of a compass. And again, in your proposal, the publisher is going to ask you, what are the competing titles? And you may think there are none, and this is where really looking at the media landscape and precedents comes in. If really there are none, you still want to show them some titles that are close, so they have an idea of the kind of book you're talking about, even if it's in terms of layout or scope or style or design. And publishers have a way of looking up the number of copies sold. So giving them a competing title list, they ask for it anyway, and it is an important element. We run the fellowship. We urge you to come and join us and apply. In the 2019 fellowship, Kelly Murdoch-Kitt came to us, and she already had a contract, but we worked with her. I worked with her in the books group to really think about structuring the whole novel, and here it is. Routledge published it in 2020. Congratulations to Kelly and Danielle. In the first fellowship that I worked with in the books group, Liat Verdugo was there, and she came with this wonderful proposal and concept, and I was just very excited, and we talked about all the different possibilities and the different types of publishers, and here it is. Congratulations to Liat, Bloomsbury 2021. And we have many others who have contracts, and so that's very exciting prospects, and I hope their noses are to the grindstone. Okay, Aaris.
Thanks, Robin. So just before we head over to the Miro board for the more interactive part of the session, and this is Lisa, if you can start to put that link into the chat, that would be great. I'm going to stop sharing in a second here to make sure we're all over there. But I did want to just emphasize a couple things that Robin said that I think if you're not working on a book project but are a newer writer in maybe a shorter form, are absolutely applicable to you as well, and that is narrowing your focus. When we work with newer design writers, whether they're on 1,000-word documents or on like a journal article that's 5,000 words, we almost always have too broad a focus in the beginning, and we have to narrow it down. So that's something to be thinking about. And then that detailed table of contents, I know that's an exercise Robin and I both do with folks who are looking to write in our workshops. And if it's not a book, then it should be a detailed outline that you're filling in. It's not how everybody writes, but if you're a newer design writer, it's certainly a way to make sure that you don't kind of go off on a tangent, or that if you do, you've added it into your outline. And I think that that's a big thing in terms of articles as well. I think we have a tendency as we're doing research to sort of deviate from our outlines. And so I would say that everything that Robin mentioned about that in relation to the books is absolutely true for articles and for those shorter form pieces. So I'm going to just stop sharing for a second here. I will reshare in a minute, but I want to make sure I'm on the right place when I go over to the Miro board. So we are going to be using the Miro board, and I see so many people on it already. It's like one of those things that makes my life happy is seeing everyone moving around. Like, I'm somebody who loves to be in front of people, and so I miss having events where we could all be together face to face. But just in looking at the landscape of who's on this call and seeing so many familiar faces, which is awesome, I know that that might not have been possible because I see people from literally all over the country. So this is the next best thing. So I am going to go back and I'm going to just share my Miro board so I can sort of talk you through what we're going to be doing. And Megan, you're actually somebody I do see. So if you're not seeing the Miro board sharing, please give me a heads up. But if you are, no worries. I just want to make sure that everybody's seeing that as I'm sharing. Okay, I get a thumbs up from Megan, so I know I'm good. So here we are on the Miro board, and this is just, when we have so many people on a call, this is an easy way to kind of think about some of the landscapes and really utilize all of the thinking that happens and our backgrounds from different institutions. So here we are at the start here, the big star. I always like to try and make it obvious. And what you'll see is over on the right, you'll see here, Robin and I have put together a list of of types of writing you might do that will get published. We might have missed some, so I've left at the bottom that you can add your own. There's a lot of people on the call, so what I'm suggesting, rather than dragging them over, is that we just copy and paste. And we actually put them where they would go in terms of our institution weighting them towards tenure. And the reason for that is that I think it's really important to acknowledge that we're not writing in a vacuum, at least not until we retire or like win the lottery, right? We're writing with some other people's goals in mind as well, and our institutional goals in mind. And so my thought is that this will end up being, if you copy and paste, this will end up being like a really fun, colorful collage to see where different institutions might value different types of writing. And so I see that happening already, and it's really exciting. Don't forget those ones that are weighted less towards tenure as well. And we're just going to spend a few moments on that. So I'm just going to do 3 minutes and see how we're doing. And if anything has come up in the chat, Lisa, feel free to ask us to let us know if there's any questions related to this that come up in the chat.
There are a couple of questions. So I think while people are sorting, maybe both of you could answer them or attempt to answer them. So Jacinda asks, are there design writing coaches? And if so, what might those cost? So any thoughts the two of you have about that?
Robin,
Aaris,
you want to?
Aaris, you're the fellowship queen, so.
So this is actually a question that I get coming to my inbox, hopefully not on my writing day, Thursdays, but other days pretty often. There are academic writing coaches, and I have checked out their websites, and I think you have to do the inquiry before you figure out what they're charging. I don't know of any design writing coaches in particular. We at Design Incubation, we have the fellowship, which is a 3-day writing workshop, which you then we ask you to spend a little bit more time than the 3 days. You're spending sort of a whole year or half a year on a more substantive writing project. So that 3-day, the fee for that is $300. And you do then get access to all the facilitators who work in various areas of writing. Like I work also with the reviews group, and we have Maggie Taft who works with the articles group. So that is, my guess is that's probably the cheapest way to enter into that kind of information and mentorship. I'm thinking that an academic coach will probably charge a little more.
And Aaris, do you want to talk about Maggie's Chicago office?
Sure. So Maggie Taft, formerly managing editor for Design and Culture, and I think she has a slightly different title now, but had that title for a number of years, has a writing center that she runs in Chicago. And back before the world shut down, every year we have a writing residency there. And that really came out of feedback that we got from the fellowship, where people said, this is great, but we want to go somewhere and actually spend time writing. So she's there to be kind of a little bit of a coach, but there's less scheduled programming and more writing time. We're hoping that will be able to pick up again once we are leave our permanently virtual environments right now, once we've moved back to face-to-face. Another question, Liz?
Sure, yeah. So the next question is from Tony Lee. And they ask, what process is used for student work as design examples in published books? So how does that process work of using the work of students? And then what about students who might have graduated?
That's a great question. And I'm noting here, I'm being slightly distracted by how beautifully colorful the Miro board is getting. Do you have any advice on that, Robin?
Yes, well, it depends on your institution. Usually student work created at a university gives you rights to use it, but a publisher will provide you with permission forms. Each publisher has their own permission forms for rights. And you have to get the student or a professional to sign off saying that it is their intellectual property and they are giving you permission to use it. Of course, if a student includes an existing logo or stock imagery, you have to be very careful because they don't own the rights to that. So It's very tricky with student work. You have to really go through it and make sure that the student does own the rights, that they have created the work, and get them to sign off on it. Even if you assume that you can use it because it was created in your class or at the university, you really need everybody to sign off. I'm very judicious about getting people to sign off.
Yeah, I agree with everything Robin said, and would just say that my current publisher requires that permission, the rights form, to be signed off by everybody who's included, even if they're students, and that's protection for you and protection for the publisher. What I tend to do if I know that that might happen is I tend to try and make sure I'm connected with people via email or on LinkedIn. So if they are alumni, but they made student work in the past, I can get back in touch. And I actually saw that I have one student on this call, which is awesome. Makes me very happy, a former student, but I've never had a student say, no, don't use my student work for your book. Mostly they're really happy to have their work included. But I would also say sometimes people ask, is it worth getting the permission at the moment? My publisher, or the publishers I've worked with, have required us to use their own permissions forms. So you'd have to go back and have them refill out a permission form. So it's probably not worth that extra step of sort of getting that material and cataloging it. So I did want to just jump back and think about the Miro board here, which has gotten so colorful. And what I think is really great is that we see clusters of color, which shows that your institutions are viewing the production of certain types of writing fairly similarly, but we do see deviations. And that was kind of the whole reason that we wanted to do this part of the exercise, is that what works for you for tenure and how it's counted is dependent on where you're working right now, right? Going through the tenure process. And so I think it's really important to note that, like, if my passion is newspaper articles, that's one I see there's some deviation between more heavily weighted towards tenure and less heavily weighted towards tenure. If that's something kind of being the public intellectual that really, that really drives me, that makes me excited, that's something that I might wait if I'm working at, at like my current institution. I might wait to spend a lot of time on that until after tenure. It feels like a really long time, but actually it's not. 6 years goes by really fast. And so after tenure, you have a lot more flexibility to pursue things like exhibition catalogs or newspaper articles, some of these other exhibition reviews, some of these things that we're seeing, personal writing and designing a book, like some of these things that don't fit into those categories really neatly for your institution. Robin, do you have any other thoughts based on what we're seeing in terms of the breakdown of colors and what people have up here?
Yeah, I totally agree with what you said. I think that especially for textbooks, it's important to find out what your provost and your dean feel about textbooks. I'm very lucky. My provost thinks that pedagogy is as important as scholarly books, so I lucked out. But it really depends on the institution. We know everybody values books published by university presses, and then some places will even determine whether a journal or a university press, where they're ranked. Now, we have a problem in design because the hard sciences are the ones who are ranked A-list journals, and I keep trying to explain that to our administration, and I think it's probably something we need to get in writing. But they do understand when you publish with a university press.
Absolutely, and I do think that some of these other areas, exhibition reviews, book reviews, even textbooks, the goal is for us to be productive people, educators as well as in our own work. That's why we're hired by the colleges and universities that we work at. And so just because, I often get asked, like, so book reviews, we'll see it sort of on the right side here. Does that mean that I shouldn't bother doing those? And one of the things I say, because I work with a lot of people around book and exhibition review writing, is that it's such a great way to learn about design writing. And that has tremendous value. And adding, if you're somebody who's a practice-based designer and you're feeling like that round or square peg in the round hole at your institution, trying to figure that out, doing a few things that are sort of more like traditional scholarship, even if you don't make that the focus of your work, can really help your dean like make that case when they're up to the university committee. And so some of these areas that don't have tons of weight, that doesn't mean that they don't belong in your dossier. They just maybe don't belong taking up tons of time and space in your dossier and tons of time and space in your life as a writer.
I totally agree. And it's very important when you do write for a journal to make sure that you write that it's peer reviewed in your dossier and on your CV, and some are double blind peer review. And again, everybody knows what that means. So that's important.
Yeah, so I'm here as the timekeeper. This is, you can see Robin and I are passionate about this, so we could go on literally probably for hours, but I know you all have the rest of your lives to get to. So I did want to just jump into to the second part and have you all start to be working on questions about design writing and barriers to design writing. And there's a couple reasons that we're doing this today. The first is so hopefully we can talk about some of these things and answer them in real time. But the second is that we're hoping to create kind of a snapshot of what roughly 50 people feel about this, because then that will help AIGA DEC and also Design Incubation start to think about like what programming and what opportunities maybe we can offer to help connect some of y'all with resources. And this is a great way to do that. So you can jump in and you just need to double click on the stickies and or pull out your own stickies, however you want to do it, and do barriers and questions to design writing. Let's not go down below that line yet. Let's just fill in as many of these as possible as we go, and maybe we'll try and answer some questions the same way we did as people were working on this sort of assignment part. We'll get Lisa to say if there's some questions that we can answer at the same time.
There are. I haven't scrolled down. I think there might be a couple more new ones, but I do have two for sure. So Jen Stucker asks, do you feel more confidence in being a writer or as a designer?
That's great. And hey, big shout out to Jen. Great to see you on the call. I'll answer and then I'll let Robin jump in. I would say for most of my time in education, it was maybe kind of equal. In the last 5 or 6 years, I have really kind of devoted myself to design research and writing and helping folks with some of these issues. And so at this point, if I was going to sort of think about starting a studio or something, I'd say I'm much more comfortable at this point, pitching a new project than I am founding a new studio or something. Robin, what do you think?
I'm like one of those eager puppies who like you dangle a project in front of me and I'm like, yeah. So I'm very excited about writing, research and design and even consulting. I think it depends on the client and it depends on the publisher and it depends on the project. But I have devoted, I would say, most of my time to writing. And I actually, Aaris will tell you, I love writing. I'm somebody who feared it in the beginning, but jumped in anyway. I have graduate training in art history, and so it was part and parcel of my background. But writing just makes me feel good, just the way drawing makes me feel good.
Great. I'm just seeing everybody, don't forget those questions about design writing. I see everybody's got the barriers. It seems like we have no shortage of barriers here. So let's get some questions too in there. So Lisa, you said there's another question as well?
Yep, I think there's a few, so we'll see how many we get through. But one of Robin's former undergrad students, Jason Alejandro, has a great question saying that he can never seem to get over the anxiety that comes with writing down the very first sentence or thought. So any strategies from the two of you to try to address that? How do you get started?
Well, yay, Jason, I'm so excited and congratulations on your university post. So wonderful and proud of you. Thank you for asking that. Well, you can play a surrealist game. You can just write any old thing. You can just do stream of consciousness writing is a good way. You can use a mind map. You can start with a word in the center and draw out. I think that you have to put aside being a judge when you start writing and just say something outright and just start and not judge it in the beginning. Just keep going. But you have to write something, and it can be any old thing as long as you start writing. But if you want to try a surrealist game of free association, that's a wonderful way to start.
Yeah, that's great advice. I would just say that I'm somebody whose first draft doesn't look great. Like I have shared first drafts because I know that I eventually get to a better place, but they don't have proper punctuation. Sometimes they just stop in the middle of a thought. One of the things that I tell people who just have where the writing part turns on, like flips this anxiety switch, is to try text to speech, because we're so, as educators, we're so used to talking. So, you know, open up a Google Docs. The Google one's pretty good. I've experimented with it. I found I'm actually faster at typing now because I've done it for so long, but it's really great for when you're just starting to write and you have that anxiety, because you tend to have less anxiety about speech. And so that's one piece of advice I have. And the other thing is that people love to start writing at the beginning. And I almost never start writing at the beginning because it's invariably going to have to get rewritten 10 times. So I will start writing at the place that I feel most confident and feel is easiest. And that is rarely the introduction. And in fact, publishers, this doesn't go for articles, but publishers are almost always say they would not like the introduction. They would like to get into the meat of the project. So that's a good place to start for that reason as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's good to start with something you feel you really know well, and you could record your lectures too, and then listen back and parse those for information. The mind mapping is a really easy way to start.
Excellent. All right, so we have another question from Matt Wizinski, who says, very excited to have my first book contracted for publication. Congratulations. Beginning to plan how to disseminate the book, creating teaching modules, tools, assets for practitioners, etc. So any recommended resources to help plan that next phase? So you've written the book, or thinking about how then does it get disseminated and all of those parts.
Robin, you got to take this. You're way better at this than me.
Well, I'm not clear. Is it you're talking about ancillary materials that accompany the book, or are you talking about marketing the book? I mean, disseminating. I'm not clear about the question.
It says, e.g., create teaching modules, tools, assets for practitioners, etc. So I'm not sure beyond that. Or if Matt wants to hop on and say what he means.
Well, usually the publisher will post those on the website. And so almost all of my books come with ancillary materials for teachers, rubrics, syllabi, PowerPoint, glossaries, like a million different things, including some extra content and articles. And the publisher posts that on their website. And so when you go onto a publisher's website, there's usually information for the general public, for students, or for instructors, and they'll send you to an instructor site. If the publisher doesn't do that for you, then you may want to get a mailing list together, or you may want to have your own website and post it there and let people know and ask them to share it, or put it on Facebook or share it that way, or start sharing things on Instagram, or LinkedIn is a really good place if you have a lot of connections. I use LinkedIn the most because that's where I have the most connections. And I've also created open resource materials for this new book coming out as a way to promote.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Robin said, and would just add that, you can kind of feel like the hamster on the wheel, doing you research, you write the book, maybe you design it too, then you're marketing it. I mean, at some point, some of what the publisher does has to take over. And sometimes I think ancillary material, I think it depends on the type of book. I think Robin's been pretty successful at that. I have sometimes felt like it's work for the sake of work. The publisher thought it would get more readers, but it didn't necessarily. And so I have sort of mixed feelings about that personally. I think really getting an understanding from your publisher about why those ancillary materials are going to help sell the book, and maybe some data they have from other titles is helpful, because I have a feeling like a lot of publishers have no problem just having you do more free work is great, or more work under that contract. So I want to just, again, I'm here being a little bit mindful of time, and I'm so happy to see all of both. I mean, I'm not happy that there are barriers, but I'm really happy you all feel comfortable sharing them with us. And so I'm going to go through some of those, and if all of you will now do a little bit of the crowdsourcing and just bringing the sticky notes down into the ones that feel most urgent. Burning desire to know more is my title here, and mild desire to know is what we say on the other side, to try and give us a little bit of a sense of where you might be interested in having more content created. That will really help us not just understand the landscape that people have around barriers and questions about writing, but also where they actively want to know more, as opposed to just kind of wondering. So if you can do that, that would be great. And I just want to read a few, how to process feedback, especially negative. That's huge. And yeah, in the fellowship, I have a slide that shows a glass of wine. But really what I say when I do a presentation that deals with this is, I usually take a breath, write a very insincere message to my editor that says, thank you so much for all of the feedback, as I'm thinking about like strangling her at the moment. And then I have a glass of wine, put that aside, and come back to it. And oftentimes just that time away, I can reapproach it and say, this is a problem to solve, as opposed to somebody telling me my writing has huge issues. Robin, do you have anything else to add to that? Because I feel like that's something that keeps a lot of people from taking that next step.
It's put on a vest and don't let it get to you. What I try to do is learn from the negative comments and decide whether they have any value. So I really love when I get feedback. I love Landa's books. I use them all. She's great. But that doesn't help me improve the book. Although if you ever do a review, please do say that. But when somebody writes a criticism, then I say, well, is that the case? And in fact, somebody did criticize my writing years ago, and I went and I read Stephen King's book on writing, and it really helped my writing. So I just try to be proactive about what the criticism is. Sometimes it's nonsense, because usually what you'll get is, well, I'm going to write that book, and so this is really garbage. You're going to get like all kinds of nonsense. You're going to get good stuff. You're going to get great feedback. You're going to get negative feedback, but you have to put it in context. The main thing to consider is whether the publisher believes in the negative criticism. And then you have to figure out how to negotiate that and how to create a rationale for what you want to do. And sometimes the publisher really doesn't know your discipline. So for example, many years ago, they sent out my book for review to 2 professors who were in the wrong discipline. They sent it out to people in graphic communications, not communication design. And I got back all this feedback about, why isn't she talking about printing? And why isn't she? I'm like, what is this? This is the wrong people. So you really have to be very proactive in terms of making the editor understand the criticism.
Absolutely. Something I would just add to that in terms of feedback and my approach to feedback after I have the wine and wait a couple of days is that I I always think of it as feedback probably indicates there's some issue if it's specific to a certain area of the text. The reviewer might not, like maybe I wasn't that great at explaining what I was trying to say. So the reviewer feedback itself may actually not align with what I want to do to address that section. But I try to look at it as like, if somebody flags this, particularly if two people flag this, but even if one person flagged this, it might just be that I didn't explain myself that well in that section in the writing, or that that section doesn't feel like it belongs. Sometimes I've had to move a section to a different chapter or to the beginning or the end of an article. And so that's sort of how I tend to approach it. And I think you'll find most publishers, whether they be, you know, when you get that feedback back, even in an article, you can sort of say, well, this peer review wasn't exactly addressing what I was talking about here, but I've moved it around and addressed this issue, but I was trying to do something a little bit different here in this particular space. And that can be sort of a rebuttal, if we would like to think about it that way, to negative feedback. So down here on the Miro board, I'm just looking at, it looks like time is a big issue, lack of confidence, imposter syndrome, what to write about. These things seem to be ideas that are bubbling up for a few of our audience, so that's great to hear. Not again that you're struggling about that, but that's maybe something that we could come back to at another time. The other thing that's really coming up here is this access to a community of writers, and where do I bounce ideas off of if I'm in a small program and maybe I'm only the design faculty, or there's only a few design faculty. And I think that that is that's an issue that's very specific in some ways to our discipline. But one of the things that other disciplines have done is around these issues is having writing groups where people do share and read each other's writing, because paying an editor is not even always the best thing at every stage. If you wanted that feedback, just having another person who's a good reader, right? Because we're all good readers, give that feedback can be really helpful before you get that actual peer review. And we do have 2 writing groups happening right now at Design Incubation. And I think those people had to commit to a year. And I think that the most interesting thing so far that's come out of the newest writing group, the newer writers, is that they've said, like, they won't, regardless of if they continue on in a formal way with Design Incubation, they have a plan to continue their writing group beyond that year. And so I do think that there's sort of a sense of providing some places for people to come together as being quite important. Should we answer a few more burning questions that might be coming? Do we have any more, Elisa?
We do have more in the chat for sure.
Okay, let's do a few of those.
Okay, so Joanna has a very long, lovely post in the chat, but I'm going to try to sum it up by asking her. I think the question they're asking here is, do you have any guidance or suggestions on learning more about doing design writing from kind of like just a starting point of not really knowing a lot about design writing in general? And would you have any suggestions for a sort of 101 design writing book?
Yeah, so that is a perfect one to go down to the bottom of our Miro board. Spoiler alert, your takeaway for all of you is this design writing resource. And I'm going to just try and click on this, and Megan or Lisa, can you tell me if it's are you seeing the, yeah, okay, perfect. So this is what Robin and I and some others have been working on in our not really infinite spare time, but it's based on a document that was much less editable. And so we've put together this whole list of advice on how to write 100 words. Writing for the design mind might be where I'd start on that. But everything from tools and permissions. I saw permissions was a question that came up. We can't be here to answer every question. We don't have every week with all of you. So we're hoping that some of the resources out there, we've been able to kind of crowdsource those together and put them into a living document, which I encourage all of you to add to as well. I have academic book publishers here university, institutional publishers. So this is kind of our takeaway, and it seems like a good place to just pause and talk about this, because I would say up at the top here, some of these general advices on how to write, these first couple might be a great place to start. There isn't really a class, Design Writing 101, and probably unless you're a graduate student somewhere. So without sort of paying to go back to school, some of these resources are probably a great way to start. Robin, do you have any thoughts on this?
I think that first book, I haven't read it yet, but I hear very good things about it. And I think that's probably the first place to start. And then to go back to Aaris's original advice in her presentation is to read a lot of journal articles, read what the AIGA on Design is at, read different types of design writing and see what gels with you and what you think you'd like, which kind of writing. Some is very straightforward, some is very journalistic, some is very jargonistic, if that's not a word, but you get the idea. You figure out what's your jam. You got to figure out what you want to do.
Absolutely, and I just want to put a little star on this writing question here, because it's something that comes up all the time when we're doing workshops, is my writing rigorous enough? And so Maggie Taft, I'm sort of leaning and paraphrasing what I've heard Maggie Taft say and to address this question many times, and she says it very eloquently, so I'm not sure I'll do that justice, but it's not your writing that should be rigorous, it's your research. And I think that that's really important, because there is a sense that writing that's hard to read is better writing. And Maggie is just amazing at breaking that down. And, you know, I think we all of us who've been in design writing a while will say that if writing is hard to read, that is not good writing, right? Is there a sense where maybe your research isn't rigorous enough compared to, and that's an issue that comes back from peer review. That's a whole other thing, but very good design writing, I always think of it as being very articulate speech, when I can go back and like fix the ums and all the things that I wish I had said slightly differently. Other questions that have come up in the chat?
Yes, there's a really great one from Patricia Childers. Hey, Patricia. So any particular way to organize? In the past, I had stacks and stacks of books with Post-it notes. Now with so many digital snippets, they tend to get lost. So do you have any strategies for kind of keeping track of all of those resources and thoughts and materials?
Robin, what do you do?
I think mine is different than yours because you use handwriting on yellow pads. I use snippets inside my running text, and I bracket it and I write the source of it in there, or I will put it in a comment, an insert in a comment. Usually I just bracket it and leave it there and figure out when I'm going to use it, and then either I'll leave it till I use it or I cut it. But I may not be the best person to ask, since I've been doing it for so long that I kind of just organically move along. But some people do keep side documents where they archive their information, and then you can do it chapter by chapter and keep your references that way.
Yeah, I'm back here in my design writing resources wiki here, because I think that the citation info and digital writing tools are where a lot of people are going who are starting writing now. The Scrivener and the Zotero both have recommended on them, because that's something that we've had a number of writers say works really well for them. And in some ways, I think that's, you know, if any of you have any thoughts on that, feel free to like push that into the chat, because I think as people who've been writing for longer, Robin and I might be more set in our ways, and I'm not sure we would do it the same way were we to start writing again at the beginning today. The one thing, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that publishers will want Word documents, and I think Scribner exports to a Word document. So just keep in mind that they still want it in Word.
Absolutely. Yeah, Microsoft Word is still king over at the publishers, even if it isn't in our design classrooms. I saw something about, I'm in the UK, non-academic, and art journals are super expensive. How do I do the reading when it's really expensive to do? And I just want to address that because I do think that that's a very real barrier. I'm not sure about in the UK, but I know the larger public library systems here have subscriptions to databases because my institution actually stopped subscribing to the better design and applied arts index that had the best way for me to find that material. And I now have to go through the city's public library system databases as kind of a workaround. And so that might be something to look at, is whether either if you're an alumni of an institution, you usually retain library privileges, and or if you're in a larger community, I guess not everybody retains library privileges, but some institutions I know they offer, if you are an alumni with an alumni card, they do sometimes offer library privileges. But if you're also in a larger municipality, hopefully they will have some access to some of those databases that allow you not necessarily to read the journal from cover to cover, but to keep up with it. And usually you can see the abstracts of what's published in the journals online, so you can kind of pick and choose where to go and find them digitally. It's not a perfect system, but it is a bit of a workaround if you don't want to pay the money. So we're approaching the end of our time. Do you have some other questions that you think we should be answering that people maybe have as burning questions that a lot of people might want answers to?
Well, I do have one. I don't know what's below the line here, but I think this is worth sort of talking about at least briefly. So Julie asks, any tips or resources for ensuring design research is rigorous enough? And Stephen McCarthy did answer back that conference papers are a great forum for testing out ideas and getting collegial feedback. But do you have any other suggestions for kind of working on design research that is rigorous enough?
Aaris, I'll let you go first.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think Stephen, thanks for jumping in there. I absolutely agree with that. I'm so pleased that so many of you are on this call. If we had a smaller call, we might be able to do more of kind of a round robin. But yeah, I think conference presentations are not just in our own discipline, but are typically where people will try out those ideas. And if you feel like you're even at an earlier stage than a regular conference, I think the design incubation colloquia, which are 6 minutes, that is a great place to try out some of those those ideas and see if you get questions about certain things, see what kind of feedback you get on that in a very friendly, supportive environment. Having a writing buddy, I mean, I know that can be difficult if you don't have a great connection in your local community in terms of design educators, but I also just think having other people read your writing, there's really no substitute for that. They don't even have to be designers. So one of the things that I would say is that if you have a writing center at your own institution, it can be really great to read the work of somebody else, usually in a humanities discipline, because sometimes the hard sciences, what they're doing for journals is quite different. But if you are in a humanities school, in a school of humanities or liberal arts and sciences, reading somebody in history or English and having them read your work can be really useful.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I thank you, Stephen. That's absolutely perfect advice. I think doing a design incubation presentation of 6.5 minutes really gets you to be concise and pithy. And I think, I've imposed on colleagues in the past to read something, and that's been very helpful. And you could offer to trade or get a small group together. But I think it is important to present before you propose a book or an article.
Yeah, and I would just add that over here, back in my design writing resources wiki, we have a list of places for conference presentations and for design opportunities. And I do encourage everyone, this is not necessarily exhaustive, but sometimes newer faculty to the discipline feel like there's kind of nowhere to get the word out about their work or to make these connections. And so I think it's useful to know that, you know, I might be presenting at UCDA and RGD one year and at an AIGA and a CAA another year. And I think that that's pretty common for people who've been in the discipline a while, but it can feel a little overwhelming for newer faculty.
Just to dovetail on Stephen's suggestion again, not only is it good to see if it's rigorous enough, but to see the enthusiasm for it. So Kelly Walters, a professor at Parsons, gave a presentation at Design Incubation a while back, and the enthusiasm was just amazing in the room. And I think that fueled her to keep going. So there's that other part of it too.
Yeah, that's a great one. Like sometimes when we're in, you know, I always talk about how I've been in these four walls, you know, for most of the pandemic here. And so just getting that sense from, getting that gut feedback for, you know, seeing how the room reacts can be really useful. And if you're feeling down about, not just if you're feeling like this is great, but if you're feeling down, it can be a place to get that confidence back. I stopped sharing because I wanted to see everybody's faces or at least pictures here and take a look at, you know, have an eye on the chat as well. And yes, Kelly has a book launch tomorrow. I just see that in the chat. I know I'm signed up, so I encourage you all to sign up as well. Looking forward to reading Kelly's book and hearing her and her collaborators talk about that. Lisa, any last questions that we should hit before we're done?
I don't see any, so now's your chance, everyone. If you have one of those last burning questions you want to ask.
Anything you want to ask, or even anything you wish we would do, we at Design Incubation, we at the DC, anything you want us to do more of, please also feel free. We're going to look back at the Miro board, but we're happy to do more of this if there's interest. I see, where can you see the recorded video? Lisa, you want to deal with that?
So we'll be editing this and we'll post it to our YouTube channel, the AIGA DEC YouTube channel very soon. I believe if you just Google AIGA Design Educators YouTube, you should get there, but it's also within all of our social media, I think.
Yeah, great.
And Megan posted it to the chat because she's our spam bot.
Yes, that's my role in life. But I'd also point, I know Dan's been talking a lot too about your Design Incubation social channel. So I wanted to point people there as well for sort of there's a lot of good conversation about tenure and promotion standards, but also about design writing. So please do check out Design Incubation's other events. And we've sort of been populating with some of our social as well, but we hope to be doing more collaborations like this in the future. And we are so thankful for you both for all of your time and effort and so much valuable information today.
Yeah, thanks to everybody for the great questions. It's been really exciting also to see the Miro board populate and for us to be able to go back and look at that as we think about programming for the future. Please do join those social, I'll put that on the Writing Resources Wiki as well. Please do join that because the nice thing about it is it's searchable. So unlike the DC Facebook page, which is amazing for like right now, if you need to go back and sort of see what people, like what a bunch of people thought about tenure and promotion over time, it's much easier to kind of capture that information. So that's our plug for that. So thanks to everybody. We're super happy you were willing to spend a Wednesday afternoon or late morning, depending on which coast you're on, or evening if you're in Europe, with Robin and I. Really happy to have been able to work with everybody. Robin, any last thoughts?
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. And just do it. Just do it. Just jump in and do it. Just jump in the water.